What if the feeling that you are working harder, but, you know, owning less isn't just bad luck?
Or just a symptom of a rough economy.
Right. What if it's not a personal failure at all? What if it is a mathematically scheduled event?
A deliberate architectural feature of the global financial system.
Exactly. A system designed to trap you in what we might call a rent generation.
It is a terrifying thought,
Uh-oh.
honestly.
It really is. Today, we are opening up a survival protocol written by an anonymous entity.
Yeah.
And this protocol claims the clock on our current economic reality. Well, it basically runs out in 2026.
Which is a startling proposition to confront. I mean, we are socially conditioned to view economic hardships as just a series of unfortunate, disconnected events.
Like a localized housing crisis here, or, a burst of supply chain inflation there.
Yeah, exactly. But the materials we are examining today, they attempt to completely reframe that narrative.
They do.
They suggest that these are not isolated market failures, but rather the rhythmic, predictable contractions of a machine that is operating exactly as intended.
And I have to say, this stack of materials we're going through today is unlike anything we have tackled on this deep dive before.
It's incredibly dense.
It is a highly detailed, incredibly esoteric, and honestly somewhat terrifying collection of documents, charts, and philosophical frameworks. And they are all authored by an entity, or maybe an individual, known only as Dr. O Academy of Nature.
The sheer density of the text is, well, it's a massive undertaking to parse. The documents are this labyrinthine blend of 19th century agricultural economic cycles.
Which is wild.
Right, and deeply obscure sections of commercial law, specifically UCC Article 12.
Plus these predictions of a biometric digital currency dystopia.
Yeah, at first glance, it reads like apocalyptic science fiction.
Totally.
But the author anchors these really wild predictions by citing actual, verifiable administrative standards, active congressional bills, and historical banking precedents.
So here is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack this massive, complex survival protocol.
We have to decode a lot of heavy jargon.
Oh, a ton of jargon. Terms like the Law of 86, the monster, and the I thou he dynamic.
And most importantly, we are going to explore the granular step-by-step roadmap the text claims is absolutely necessary to survive.
Survive what it calls an impending total systemic collapse starting in 2026.
We are looking at the math, the law, and the alleged escape hatch.
But before we dive right into the mechanics of this protocol, we should probably set some ground rules for this deep dive.
Yeah, it is vital that we establish the boundaries of our analysis today, because the sources we are dissecting contain highly politically charged imagery.
Very specific geopolitical references, too.
Exactly. The text invokes past presidents, current Treasury secretaries, and outlines specific global conflicts. Most notably, a prediction regarding an impending Iranian war action acting as a catalyst in early 2026.
Right, and we need to be explicitly clear for you, the listener. We are not endorsing, validating, or taking sides on any political figures, wars, or ideologies presented in these documents.
We are strictly acting as impartial guides.
Yeah.
Our function today is to analyze the architecture of the author's argument exactly as it is laid out in the text. We're exploring the internal logic of this worldview without validating its external political claims.
We are essentially cartographers, mapping out this very strange territory that Dr. O has drawn for us.
That's a good way to put it.
And to understand where this map leads, this impending collapse, we first have to understand where the author thinks we are standing right now.
The diagnosis of our present reality.
Right, and it starts with the premise that I think is going to hit a very exposed nerve for anyone listening. The author argues that your parents, or maybe your grandparents, were the absolute last generation to live a normal life.
And the author defines that concept of a normal life with very specific economic parameters.
Right.
It describes an era where the fundamental social contract of Western society still functioned. The implicit deal was straightforward, and it was mathematically viable.
Like, if you put in 40 hours a week of honest labor,
You could reasonably expect to achieve homeownership, build a surplus of savings, raise a family with relative stability, and eventually retire without facing destitution.
which feels like a pipe dream now.
Well, the author acknowledges this era wasn't utopian and it wasn't easy. But the core mathematical equation, where consistent effort roughly equaled long-term ownership, generally balanced out for the middle class.
But the text argues that this equation has been quietly, deliberately dismantled for the current generation.
Dismantled and replaced.
Yeah, that old promise of work hard and build a life has been replaced by this new, unspoken mandate that governs our daily existence.
The new paradigm.
Right. And the new paradigm is basically this. You will work forever, you will rent everything, you will delay having children because the financial barrier to entry is simply too high.
You will carry a massive, uncapable burden of debt your entire life.
And the most insidious part, the system will actively train you to call this condition freedom or flexibility.
The text makes a really compelling observation regarding the incremental nature of this shift, though. This wasn't a sudden legislative change.
Right, it didn't happen overnight.
No, it was a slow generational transition from a paradigm of possession to a paradigm of permanent rental.
Which we see everywhere.
Exactly. Look at the progression the author outlines. First, housing transitioned from being a basic human necessity and a store of family wealth into an exclusionary, hyper-financialized investment vehicle for corporate capital.
Right, Wall Street buying up single-family homes.
Then, higher education transformed from an accessible pathway to upward mobility into an inescapable front-loaded debt trap.
And healthcare costs mutated into a primary driver of personal bankruptcy. And, it trickles down from the big life milestones to the mundane aspects of daily life, too.
The subscription model.
Exactly. We now live in what is essentially a subscription model for existence. You don't own your software anymore, you lease access to it monthly.
You don't own your music or movies, you pay a platform for the privilege of streaming them.
You increasingly lease your transportation. The entire concept of building equity, putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is mine, it's being aggressively priced out of reach for the average person.
Which makes us, as the author dubs us, the rent generation.
The rent generation. You are constantly bleeding capital just for the privilege of basic access.
Which brings us to the massive contradiction the text highlights. And this is the psychological friction that I think drives so much modern anxiety.
Oh, for sure.
If you consume traditional financial media, the narrative is overwhelmingly positive. We are told the economy is robust. Broad market indexes are frequently hitting all-time highs.
The ultra-wealthy are adding staggering, unprecedented amounts to their net worth.
And major corporations are reporting record-breaking profit margins. The official top-down narrative insists that the machinery is working perfectly.
But the lived reality on the ground is completely disconnected from those metrics.
Entirely disconnected.
People are looking at the Dow Jones breaking records while they're sitting at the kitchen table trying to decide which utility bill to skip this month. It feels like an alternate reality.
The author argues this disconnect is absolutely critical to understand. It is not a market failure.
It's a feature.
Right. It is not a temporary glitch in the matrix. The fact that the stock market soars while the middle class sinks is presented as a structural feature of the new system.
It really makes me think of the mechanics of a multiplayer video game.
Okay, how so?
Imagine a massive online game where millions of people have been playing for years. And a few years ago, the developers quietly rolled out a patch to the game's code.
They changed the rules?
Exactly. They altered the physics engine, they drastically reduced the loot drops, they nerfed the rewards for basic labor. In short, they made it mathematically impossible for any new player starting today to ever reach the end level and actually win the game.
But they kept the scoreboard.
Yes, this is the insidious part. They left the old high scoreboard up, flashing in neon lights right in the center of the town square. They keep showing you the players who got rich under the old rules to keep everyone grinding, to make you think you just aren't playing the game hard enough.
That analogy perfectly captures the structural manipulation described by Dr. O. The high scoreboard is the stock market. It provides the illusion of universal prosperity.
But the code is rigged.
The underlying code, the purchasing power of fiat currency, the cost of capital, the ratio of wages to asset prices, has been fundamentally rewritten against the player.
And the author views this shift not as an accident of late-stage capitalism, right?
No, or the result of incompetent monetary policy. It is viewed as a deliberate transition initiated by a dying corporate system.
Because the state and the financial apparatus know the old game is ending.
Yes. So they're changing the rules to harvest the remaining wealth of their citizens.
Okay, let's unpack this. If the system is actively transitioning to harvest us, that implies premeditation.
It implies a schedule.
Right. And the text provides exactly that. The author doesn't just vague post about impending doom. They anchor this entire thesis to a highly specific mathematical model that is incredibly 150 years old.
Yes. To understand the timeline of the systemic collapse, the author relies entirely on the forecasting work of a man named Samuel Benner.
I found the historical context of this absolutely fascinating.
It really is a unique origin point for a theory like this.
Because Samuel Benner was not a Wall Street banker. He wasn't some academic economist at an Ivy League school.
He was an Ohio farmer in the late 19th century.
Right. And after the catastrophic financial panic of 1873 wiped out his entire livelihood, he basically became obsessed with finding the underlying mathematical rhythm behind economic booms and busts.
Because he didn't believe panics were random.
Exactly. So in 1875, he published a book where he mapped out economic cycles by meticulously tracking the historical prices of things like pig iron, corn, and cotton.
He charted the rhythm of what he explicitly called panic and prosperity.
Panic and prosperity.
And the Dr. O documents take Benner's 1875 cycle map and overlay it directly, year by year, onto our current decade.
I mean, it might sound kind of archaic to base modern financial collapse theories on the 19th century price fluctuations of pig iron, but...
But the underlying principle Benner identified is the cyclical nature of human psychology.
Right, debt accumulation and market mechanics.
Yes. These are forces that remain constant regardless of technological advancement. The Benner cycle map, as presented in the source documents, is a rigid geometric chart divided into 3 distinct rows.
Okay, let's break down the rows.
Row A represents years of major system-clearing panics.
The really bad years.
Exactly. Row B represents years of good times. These are characterized by market euphoria, high prices, and the absolute peaks where the smart money sells.
And the third row.
Row C represents hard times, the protracted troughs where asset prices are depressed and credit is scarce.
So when you look at the map the author provides, there's one year highlighted in glowing green, sitting squarely on the peak of row B.
It is the crest of the roller coaster.
And that year is 2026.
According to the author's strict application of the Benner math, 2026 marks the absolute limit of our current cycle.
The absolute limit.
Specifically, it marks the end of a 17-year cycle of unprecedented credit expansion that began in 2009.
Right after the last major global financial crisis.
Yes. The text refers to the 17-year period of artificially suppressed interest rates and quantitative easing as the transition cycle. Or it uses the Hebrew word tov, meaning good.
The era of good times.
Right. Fueled by cheap debt, it is mathematically exhausted in 2026. The system cannot stretch the illusion of prosperity any further without breaking the currency entirely.
Wait, so if the math dictates the expansion ends in 2026, then all this current market euphoria we're seeing, like the AI stock booms, the real estate bubbles, the crypto highs, what is all that?
The text categorizes the current market environment as systemic bait.
It's a trap.
A highly coordinated trap, designed by what the author terms the artificial person.
The artificial person. That term is crucial.
It is. The artificial person is the interwoven symbiotic network of central banks, corporate fictions, and state regulatory entities.
And the logic presented is that this artificial person knows it's mathematically insolvent.
Exactly. The total global debt load far exceeds the actual productive value that exists in the physical world. A reset is unavoidable.
Therefore, the system intentionally pumps the public markets to these euphoric, irrational highs.
The goal is to keep the rent generation fully invested, to keep their limited wealth locked inside digital fictions.
Things like 401ks, ETFs, and bank deposits.
Right up until the moment the liquidity is pulled.
Think of it like stretching a massive, heavy-duty rubber band.
Okay.
The system has attached one end of this rubber band to asset prices, and the other end to the actual physical economy. And since 2009, they have been pulling that rubber band tighter and tighter, expanding credit, pumping up the markets.
And everyone is cheering because the band is stretching higher than anyone thought possible.
Exactly. But the material has a physical limit. The tension is immense. And Benner's math says 2026 is the exact moment the tension exceeds the tensile strength of the rubber.
The band snaps.
The band snaps.
And the snap is violent. Following the 2026 peak, the Benner map dictates a steep descent into row C.
The hard times.
Yes. The author projects this downward spiral of severe contraction to span from 2027 to roughly 2032. This is described as a brutal 5-year period of stagflation,
where the system aggressively tries to claw back resources,
defaulting on promises and liquidating assets to cover its staggering unpayable debts.
And the rubber band doesn't just shrink back to normal. It snaps back and shatters the structures it was attached to.
The cycle hits absolute rock bottom at row A.
The Great Panic.
Yes, and the specific year cited for the final capitulation is 2035.
The text claims there is a 98% mathematical probability of the total systemic collapse of the artificial person network.
The banks, the corporate fictions, the entire multi-trillion-dollar architecture of debt, it all liquidates.
It is framed as a profound structural unwinding of the post-industrial financial order. But, the most vital part of the author's thesis isn't just that the economy crashes.
No, it's how the government reacts to the crash.
Right. The author suggests that the corporate state, fully aware of its impending demise according to this mathematical rhythm, undergoes this radical metamorphosis.
As we approach the 2026 peak and begin the descent into the hard times, the state stops pretending to be a benevolent provider.
And reveals its true predatory nature.
This shift is where the documents transition from economic theory into a dark, philosophical analysis of power.
Because the text argues that as the Benner cycle turns downward, the government doesn't just fail due to incompetence.
No, it actively transforms into what the author capitalizes as the monster.
The monster. And to comprehend the mechanics of the monster, we have to examine the philosophical core of Dr. O's thesis, a framework the text calls the postulate of Dr. O.
It is built entirely around a triad of relationships, the I-Thou-He contract.
Okay, let's break down that triad, because it sounds like a riddle, but it actually serves as the foundational key to every legal and financial strategy the author proposes later in the protocol.
In a healthy, functioning, mathematically solvent society, the author argues there exists an I-Thou relationship.
Okay, who is the I?
The I represents the living man or woman. This is the biological, breathing human being who actually expends energy and creates physical value in the world.
Within the text's legal framework, the living being is strictly defined as the creditor.
The source of all real wealth. And the thou represents the state, but only when the state is acting in its proper, limited role as a fiduciary.
A protector of the living beings, upholding common law, and facilitating fair trade.
Yes, they work in symbiosis.
But the triad has a third element.
The he.
The he, and who is the he?
The he is the artificial entity, the legal fiction, the corporation, the trust. It is the John Doe typed out in all capital letters on your driver's license or birth certificate.
It has no pulse, no biological reality.
Exactly. It exists purely as a ledger entry in commercial law. In the author's view, the tragedy of the modern era, the root cause of the rent generation's suffering, is that the thou, the protective fiduciary state, has died.
It's gone.
It has been entirely consumed and replaced by the he.
So the state stops being a partner to the living being and becomes a corporate parasite.
Yes. The text describes a failed state in a very specific way. It's not a government that is merely disorganized or bogged down by bureaucracy.
Right. A failed state is a system that has fundamentally broken the social contract. It has shifted from governance to sociopathy.
And the text provides a fascinating observable metric to identify when a nation-state crosses into this sociopathy. It notes that true leaders, the thou, possess ideas. Ideas are inherently vulnerable. They require accountability, open debate, compromise, and a genuine vision for mutual prosperity. But the administrators of the monster state, the corporate he, they do not have ideas.
No, they only deploy narratives.
The distinction between an idea and a narrative is sharp.
Very sharp. A narrative does not seek truth or debate. A narrative demands pure compliance.
It is a manufactured reality designed to control behavior.
Exactly. When the state becomes the he, the monster, it abandons any attempt to solve the mathematical bankruptcy of the Benner cycle.
Because it knows the debt is unsolvable.
Right. Therefore, its singular overriding objective becomes self-preservation at all costs.
And to preserve its own corporate existence, the monster must feed on the biological energy and stored wealth of the living citizens.
The author calls this phase predatory extraction. The system is mathematically starving, the 2026 drop is imminent, so it turns inward and begins consuming the wealth of the rent generation.
And we can see the mechanisms of this extraction in our daily reality, according to the text.
Oh, absolutely. The author points to aggressive inflation, which they categorize not as a monetary accident, but as a deliberate hidden tax.
Designed to melt away your purchasing power and transfer the value of your labor to the debtor state.
It points to explicit rising taxation. But most concerningly, it points to the looming, codified threat of bail-ins.
We really must clarify the mechanism of a bail-in, as it is vastly different from a bailout.
Yeah, please explain the difference.
During the 2008 crisis, we saw bailouts. The government used collective taxpayer funds to save failing financial institutions. A bail-in, however, is a statutory mechanism.
Already codified into law in many Western nations, right?
Yes. Following the Cyprus banking crisis of 2013, If a bank becomes insolvent, it is legally permitted to freeze the unsecured deposits of its own everyday customers.
So they can just freeze your checking account.
The bank then usurps those private funds, converting them into equity to recapitalize itself. The text argues this is the literal manifestation of the monster consuming the lifeblood of the human to survive the cycle's contraction.
I mean, if the bank freezes your life savings to save itself, your immediate instinct is to fight back. You hire a lawyer, you write to your representatives, you file a grievance with regulatory agencies.
But the text warns that this avenue is already closed.
Right. If you attempt to use the state's legal system to protect yourself from the state, you will hit a wall of what they call administrative catatonia.
Administrative catatonia is perhaps one of the most chillingly accurate descriptors in the entire text. It describes a phenomenon where the state simply begins ghosting its citizens.
Ghosting them.
You send a formal legal notice, you invoke your constitutional rights, you demand redress, and you are met with absolute silence.
The bureaucracy shuts down its responsiveness to the public, focusing all of its processing power inward on its own survival.
It stops answering the phones, it ignores the mail. The legal avenues for grievance become dead ends.
But the state can't just silently siphon everyone's money and ignore their complaints without people noticing. Widespread poverty and frozen bank accounts lead to civil unrest.
The monster needs a distraction.
It needs a massive, overwhelming narrative to justify the pain, the inflation, and the lock accounts. And the text points to a very specific catalyst.
It names a date.
March 1st, 2026. And it names an event, the Iranian war action.
Again, we must reiterate that we are analyzing the structural logic of the text, not predicting global geopolitics.
Of course.
But within the author's framework, external war serves as the ultimate thermodynamic auditor. It is the perfect narrative cover.
A massive, kinetic geopolitical conflict allows the state to declare sweeping emergencies.
It provides the justification to suspend normal administrative rules, bypass legislative debate, and seize assets under the untouchable banner of national security.
Furthermore, it provides the perfect scapegoat for what the text calls the coming stagflation.
The agonizing economic condition of simultaneously high inflation and high unemployment.
The war is the narrative smokescreen that covers up the mathematical failure of the 150-year Benner cycle.
It allows the monster to completely drop the facade of the vow and treat its citizens not as sovereign living beings, but as expendable biological assets.
The text literally refers to people as human batteries.
Meant to blindly generate tax revenue, fight conflicts, and feed the dying corporate state.
Which means the state isn't failing because the administrators made a policy mistake. It is failing because it is fundamentally bankrupt, and it's acting exactly as an apex predator should when cornered by the end of a long-term economic cycle.
The sociopathy, the extraction, the catatonia, these are not bugs in the system. They're the ultimate survival mechanisms of desperate corporate entity.
So if the monster must feed on its citizens to survive the 2026 peak and endure the ensuing crash, how exactly is it going to extract that wealth? Because standard extraction methods have limits.
Yes, if you just print money relentlessly, you trigger hyperinflation, the currency becomes worthless, and the citizens eventually revolt.
Right. And if you tax them at 90%, they stop working.
The text argues that the monster recognizes these limits, therefore it has prepared a much more sophisticated, inescapable technological trap.
And this trap involves changing the fundamental legal definition of what it actually means to own your money.
This transition leads us into the deepest legal and technological mechanics of the 2026 timeline. The author points to a massive, largely unpublicized shift occurring in commercial law.
Specifically concerning updates to the Uniform Commercial Code.
Yes, UCC Article 12.
Okay, the Uniform Commercial Code. For those who aren't corporate lawyers, this is basically the master set of rules that governs how business, trade, and financial transactions are legally conducted across the United States.
It's the operating system of the economy.
Right.
And historically, under the older, established sections of the UCC, the concept of ownership was intrinsically linked to physical reality.
Meaning if you held a physical $20 bill in your hand or a gold coin in a safe, you had possession.
The law recognized that you owned it. It was tangible, private property, and severing you from that property required due process.
But the text warns that the widespread adoption of UCC Article 12 introduces a radical new paradigm.
The legal shift from possession to control.
Let's analyze the mechanics of that shift. Control over what, exactly? If I don't possess my money, What am I doing with it?
You are exercising control over what Article 12 defines as controllable electronic records, or CERs for short.
Okay, see yours.
The author argues that in the impending system, you will no longer possess money in any physical or legally sovereign sense. Instead, you will merely be granted the administrative privilege of controlling a digital record on a centralized ledger owned and operated by the state.
So you're basically just operating a digital switch.
Exactly. And the inherent danger of this architecture is that if the state, the monster, is the ultimate administrator of that ledger, they retain the master key.
They can update the rules of the ledger at any time.
They can program the currency to expire, they can block a transaction if your social or carbon score is deficient, or they can freeze an account entirely.
All without a trial or due process.
The text refers to this terrifying legal mechanism as the take-free trap.
If it's just a digital record on their server, and you only have control as long as they allow it, you can just hit delete. Or, more accurately, they can freeze you in place.
And the author insists this isn't just a theoretical debate among law professors. The text provides another highly specific date.
July 18th, 2026.
This is cited as the activation date for a piece of legislation it calls the Genius Act.
According to the documents, the Genius Act is the legislative hammer that forces the transition. It allegedly mandates the total migration of the U.S. economy away from decentralized fiat and physical cash,
Moving it entirely onto a vertical administrative blockchain ledger utilizing central bank digital currencies, or digital stablecoins.
So physical cash is criminalized or phased out, and everything becomes a central bank digital currency. But the text points out a specific devastating clause buried within this alleged act.
Section 4A11.
Yes. Section 4A11, what does it do?
It allegedly implements a strict system-wide ban on paying any interest or yield on these new digital dollars for ordinary retail citizens.
The author classifies this new paradigm as the zero-yield economy.
We really need to pause and consider the immense gravity of a zero-yield economy.
Oh, it's massive. Because the entire mechanism by which the middle class has historically built wealth and escaped poverty-saving surplus money in an account, earning compound interest, letting your money make money over decades. The text claims that this fundamental mathematical principle is being legally outlawed.
That is the author's precise claim. Under this new framework, money is stripped of its ability to act as an asset that can grow over time. It is transformed into a static utility purely for transactional flow.
So it's not an economic side effect, but a deliberate design choice.
A choice to mathematically prevent the rent generation from ever using compound interest to outpace inflation or escape their perpetual debt.
You are locked in a stagnant algorithmic loop where your purchasing power can only ever decrease. But, I mean, I have to push back here on the logistics. You can pass a law, but how do you actually force 300 million people to adopt this overnight? People, especially in rural areas or marginalized communities, rely heavily on physical cash.
They love the privacy of physical cash.
Right. So how does the state confiscate the physical paper supply without triggering a full-blown revolt?
The author introduces a concept that sounds straight out of a dystopian cyberpunk novel.
The rollout of a new catalyst bill, specifically a redesigned $10 bill.
The source documents include highly detailed, almost schematic-like breakdowns of this alleged new currency rollout, and the focal point of the author's concern is a physical component on the bill known as the RTF.
The relief tactile feature. Now, if the Treasury were to announce a new bill with raised bumps, the official narrative would undoubtedly state that the RTF is an accessibility feature.
Designed to help the visually impaired identify the denomination.
Right. But Dr. O claims this stated purpose is a Trojan horse.
The author asserts the RTF goes far beyond simple raised ink. They claim it is engineered as a physical biometric sensor.
Like biometric sensor.
And they tie this claim to a real-world, highly complex administrative standard cited repeatedly in the text, NIST SP Late 800-63-4.
Which is an actual publication from the National Institute of Standards and Technology regarding digital identity guidelines.
Yes. The text weaves these together to argue that when a living being touches this new $10 bill, the conductive RTF acts as an interface. It links your physical biological pulse, your liveness, to a digital algorithm on the state's ledger.
Wait, I really need to challenge the logistics of this. The author is suggesting a $10 bill that can read my pulse and sync with a blockchain. By 2026.
I know, it sounds extreme.
The manufacturing complexity, the battery requirements, the sheer scale of distributing billions of these microchip bills, it borders on science fiction. How does the author justify that technological leap?
The timeline is undeniably aggressive, and it's the point where many analysts would dismiss the text. However, the author's internal logic points to existing research and development in conductive inks, passive RFID threads, and microcircuitry that are already being integrated into modern passports and high-denomination euro notes.
Okay, so the tech isn't entirely imaginary.
No. The author argues that the invisible infrastructure for this tracking is being quietly laid right now through banking apps and digital IDs. And the 2026 Catalyst bill is simply the physical switch that finalizes the connection.
They call this connection a cryptographic heartbeat.
When you touch the money to participate in commerce, your physical biological existence is perpetually synced with an algorithmic clone on the blockchain.
A digital twin.
A digital twin.
And this brings us crashing back to the I thou he concept.
Yes, it does.
Because the living I, the biological human, is tricked into a biometric merger with the corporate he. In commercial legal terms, the author refers to this merger as joinder.
By simply using the new currency to buy a loaf of bread, you unwittingly consent to merging your sovereign biological self with the legally dead, debt-burdened digital fiction existing on the state's ledger.
It is the ultimate subjugation. You are legally volunteering to bear the weight of the artificial person's insolvency.
Oh, exactly.
Let me make sure I fully grasp the horror of this narrative. We go from a paradigm of owning a physical dollar in our pocket, a dollar that holds independent value, to being forced into an inescapable system where the mere act of touching the currency turns us into a biometric battery.
The text explicitly states that we generate transaction fees, behavioral data, and compliance metrics for the system just by existing, breathing, and participating in the network.
We are no longer the laborers or the owners of capital. We have become the product being mined by the monster.
Within the logic of the documents, it is the terminal stage of the failed state. The state can no longer generate actual physical wealth or innovation, so it must construct a digital cage.
To harvest the biometric energy and microtransaction fees of its captive citizens via their digital twins, just to keep the corporate ledger balanced for a few more years, it paints an incredibly bleak, suffocating picture of the near future.
It really does.
The Benner cycle math dictates that the crash is unavoidable in 2026. The state has morphed into a predatory monster to survive the contraction. And they've engineered a biometric digital cage via Article 12 and the Genius Act to trap our wealth and our physical energy during the fall.
Right.
If this deep dive ended right here, it would just be an elaborate, terrifying prophecy of doom. But the Dr. O documents do not stop at the diagnosis.
No, they do not. In fact, the most substantial granular portion of the entire stack of documents is dedicated to what the author calls the exit ramp.
The escape plan.
It is a highly specific, complex, multi-stage survival protocol.
And what fascinates me most about this plan is that the author insists you cannot just run out, buy a patch of land in the woods, and bury a box of cash.
Because the trap being set for 2026 is fundamentally legal and administrative in nature.
The physical bunker doesn't protect you if the state legally owns your identity and your assets via a digital ledger.
Precisely. Before you can protect your money or your physical body, you have to protect your legal status. You must sever the joinder.
Part 1 of the escape plan is entirely devoted to the mechanics of this legal severance. The objective, according to the text, is to force the system to stop recognizing you as a human.
We must recall the author's specific definitions here. In this framework, the term human refers exclusively to the legally dead corporate fiction, the debtor entity that the monster fully intends to liquidate in the 2035 Great Panic to clear its balance sheets.
So if you want your assets to be liquidated to pay off the national debt, stay a human. But if you want to survive the Benner cycle contraction, you must legally declare yourself a man or a woman.
The living, breathing, biological being, the I, the ultimate creditor of the system.
You have to legally prove to a sociopathic machine that you are actually alive.
And you prove this vitality not through physical resistance, but through a barrage of highly specific administrative paperwork.
The author states emphatically that this paperwork must be filed in Q1 or Q2 of 2026.
Before the peak drops, before the Genius Act activates, and critically, before the state retreats into full administrative catatonia.
The text outlines a series of required documents it calls notices of status. First and foremost is the verification of life.
This is a sworn, notarized declaration to the administrative system.
Basically stating, I am a live biological being, not a fictitious corporate person. I have a pulse that is independent of your RTF sensor, and I exist outside your digital ledger.
The second document, which is equally critical to the severance, is the Notice of Non-Participation.
Okay, what does that one do?
With this filing, you are proactively and legally stating that you do not consent to being held as surety or collateral for the insolvency of the artificial person.
So when the monster inevitably goes bankrupt, you are legally refusing to let your biological energy or assets be used to bail it out.
You are withdrawing your consent to the joinder.
But you can't just shout these declarations into the wind or post them on social media. The monster is a bureaucracy, a machine made of rules, so you have to fight it using the weapons of bureaucracy.
The author details an exact filing process called the routing,
Which reads like a manual for administrative combat.
The level of specificity in the routing is remarkable and speaks to the author's deep immersion in commercial law. The text instructs the reader to file UCC-1 financing statements, effectively declaring themselves the secured party holding a primary lien over their own identity and their own physical assets.
But the method of delivering these filings is where the true friction lies. The author warns that you absolutely cannot use digital systems or e-filing portals.
Because the digital realm is entirely controlled by the he?
You must fight this battle in the physical analog world. You have to use the United States Postal Service, specifically USPS certified mail.
But even just sending it certified isn't enough to secure the severance. The text is incredibly adamant about one physical detail.
You must go to the post office and demand that the clerk apply a manual postal ink stamp to your receipt. You cannot use the automated kiosk or the printed digital barcode.
The reasoning behind this seemingly trivial detail is profound within the text's logic. The manual ink stamp, applied by a human clerk, creates an undeniable analog record of time and physical reality.
It freezes the timeline.
Exactly. It proves exactly when you, the living being, initiated the severance in the physical world before the system can retroactively alter the digital records or claim they never received your notices. It is a physical artifact of your intent.
And you are sending these certified analog packages to very specific nodes in the system, to the Secretaries of State in major corporate jurisdictions like Delaware and Pennsylvania, and to the registered agents of major financial institutions.
But the ultimate prize in this administrative battle, the artifact that proves you have severed the joinder, is a small piece of green cardboard.
The green card. The physical USPS return receipt, signed by an agent of the state upon delivery. The author treats this green card like a holy relic, a talisman against the monster. The text argues that possessing that physical signature of receipt from the state creates an unbreakable legal estoppel.
We need to define estoppel clearly. It is a foundational principle in common law that prevents a person or entity from arguing something or asserting a right that directly contradicts what they have previously stated or agreed to by their actions.
In the context of the Dr. O protocol, once an agent of the state signs that physical green card, acknowledging receipt of your verification of life and your notice of non-participation,
They are legally estopped, permanently barred.
from later claiming in a digital court that you are just a dead corporate fiction subject to their liquidation. They have physically acknowledged your living status.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here, because this is where the logic seems to fracture for me.
Go ahead.
We just spent an hour establishing that the state is going to devolve into a sociopathic monster that views citizens as batteries and ignores the rules of fair play. We talked extensively about administrative catatonia.
So if the state is actively ghosting everyone, freezing bank accounts, and ignoring the law to survive a systemic collapse, why on earth do they care about a certified mail green card? Won't a desperate, starving monster just throw your paperwork in the shredder and freeze your digital account anyway?
It is the most vital, logical question to ask when evaluating this protocol. If the system is lawless, why rely on the law?
Exactly.
The author's answer is rooted very deeply in the mechanics of how administrative bureaucracies function. The text argues that you are using their own base code, their rules of administrative procedure, against them.
Meaning they have to follow some rules.
Even a sociopathic algorithmic system runs on a foundational code of rules. If it abandons its own internal logic entirely, it ceases to function as a system and dissolves into pure anarchy, which it cannot do if it wants to maintain control over the ledger.
Right, the bureaucracy is a machine. It can't function without its own operating system.
Precisely. The author's strategy hinges on their silence. When you send the notices via certified mail, and they ignore it, when they succumb to their own administrative catatonia and fail to formally rebut your claims of sovereignty within the legally allotted time frame.
Which is usually 30 to 90 days, right?
Yes. They legally default under commercial law. By filing a subsequent notice of default after their failure to respond, you win the administrative battle by forfeit.
The author argues that this sequence of unrebutted analog paperwork successfully creates what is called private jurisdiction. You have legally and permanently removed your living eye from their corporate heat. You've basically built a legal force field. You are now standing outside the blast radius of the artificial person's collapse.
That is the intended outcome of Part 1.
But as fascinating as that legal maneuvering is, a legal force field doesn't buy groceries. It doesn't pay the heating bill. It certainly doesn't protect the purchasing power of your retirement account if the stock market goes to zero.
No, it does not.
You might be legally sovereign, but you could still be entirely broke. So once you are legally recognized as a living creditor, what does the protocol instruct you to actually do with your physical money before the 2026 peak drops?
That urgent question leads us to Part 2 of the escape plan, the physical financial strategy. And this is where the author introduces a highly structured, almost alchemical framework for wealth preservation called the MST 248 defense.
MST stands for matter, space, and time.
Yes.
And the visual imagery provided in the source documents for this section is incredibly striking. It's laid out as a pyramid, blending dense financial terminology with hermetic alchemical symbols.
It presents wealth management not just as a financial necessity, but as a spiritual separation from a dying, corrupt world.
So what's the first step on this pyramid?
The immediate, urgent action required at the very base of this MST pyramid occurs concurrently with your legal paperwork in Q1 and Q2 of 2026. The mandate is clear. You must unload fictions.
The text is absolutely brutal and uncompromising about this step. It commands the reader to aggressively sell all of their stocks, liquidate their 401ks, empty their ETFs, and even drain their bank accounts of fiat cash.
It classifies all of these traditional financial instruments as dead matter.
Why? Because they are merely derivatives of the artificial person. If the bank fails in a bail-in, your digital balance fails. If the stock market crashes to row C, your retirement evaporates.
The author calculates the survival probability of this dead matter, making it through the 2035 Great Panic at a mere 12%.
So you are instructed to liquidate the fictions before the monster has the opportunity to consume them.
But you are faced with a dilemma. You can't just hold physical paper cash into your mattress because the protocol predicts massive stagflation and the Genius Act transition, which will render fiat paper worthless.
Therefore, you must quickly move the energy of your wealth to level 2 in the MST matrix. Matter. Specifically what the author calls alive matter.
And the text strictly defines alive matter as physical gold and silver.
The author frequently refers to this transition into precious metals as executing the law of 86.
In the esoteric framework of the text, the number 86 aligns with nature, or Elohim. It represents objective, physical reality. It is substance that exists entirely independently of a corporate ledger or a central bank's database.
And the author gives physical gold a 96% survival probability through the coming collapse.
Yes.
Let's look at the logic behind that specific number. Why 96%? Because gold has a unique physical property in relation to the digital trap we discussed earlier. The text states explicitly that physical gold cannot be deleted by administrative decree.
They can turn off the digital dollar network, they can freeze your CERs on the blockchain, but they cannot press a button in Washington and delete a physical gold coin sitting in your hand.
The missing 4% accounts for the physical risk of theft or governmental confiscation.
And that 4% risk is exactly why simply holding gold in a safe in your house isn't sufficient. The author acknowledges that a desperate, starving state might attempt a physical confiscation of precious metals, mirroring Executive Order 6102 in the 1930s.
So protecting the alive matter requires moving up to level 4 of the pyramid. Space. You must engineer a legally impenetrable space for this wealth. But if the monster is doing bail-ins and confiscations, how do you build a vault they can't legally touch?
The author details the meticulous creation of what they call an umbrella trust. This corresponds to the MST4 jurisdiction.
Okay, an umbrella trust.
An umbrella trust is a private, common law legal structure designed specifically to move your physical assets entirely outside the purview of public statutory law.
The text describes this trust as creating a non-domestic I-thou relationship. In practical terms, it acts as a legal invisibility cloak.
It does. Once the wealth is inside the trust, it is no longer owned by the John Doe corporate fiction that the state can legally tax, regulate, or confiscate.
It is held in a private vessel governed by natural law, and it is protected from state interference by the various estoppels you established with your certified mail campaign.
You are effectively severing the asset from the dying financial system, just as you severed your biological identity from the legal system. The wealth is secured in private jurisdiction.
And then you wait. This brings us to the apex of the survival pyramid, level 8, time.
This might be the most fascinating and psychologically demanding part of the entire strategy. It requires incredible discipline.
You hold the physical gold inside the umbrella trust, rendering it invisible to the extraction mechanisms of the state during the entirety of the hard times.
You sit on the sidelines and watch the crash of 2027, 2028, 2029, 2030, and 2031.
You watch the monster thrash, inflate the currency, and consume everything remaining in the public sphere, and you do not participate.
You are exercising what the author terms Benner cycle mastery. You are patiently waiting for the mathematical pendulum to swing to its absolute extreme. You are waiting for the bottom.
The text calls this moment the harvest.
In the year 2032, according to the Benner projection, the economic contraction hits rock bottom.
The old system is in ruins. The artificial person is gasping for liquidity. Tangible assets are priced at absolute pennies on the dollar because no one has any physical capital left.
And that is the precise moment you strike.
You deploy the preserved, concentrated purchasing power of your physical gold, which has completely survived the inflation, the digital transition, and the bail-ins to aggressively acquire real, tangible assets from the desperate, bankrupt remnants of the system.
The text provides a very specific acquisition target list for 2032. It calls them corner lots.
You are instructed to buy arable farmland, commercial real estate with physical utility, and industrial metals. You buy the physical space required to sustain a family or build a community.
But again, the author emphasizes that you do not just buy this land the normal way. You don't just get a standard warranty deed and agree to pay property taxes to the county forever.
Because if you do that, you are just re-entering the system as a tenant.
Crucially, the final step of the protocol requires you to use the legal structure of your private trust to secure what is called an allodial title to these corner lots.
Let's spend a moment on allodial title, because it's a concept most modern people have never encountered, yet it is the ultimate goal of the entire Dr. O protocol.
To understand it, we have to look at how we own homes right now.
Today, you buy a house in fee simple. You get a mortgage, you pay it off, and you say, I own my house. But if you stop paying the county your $5,000 a year in property taxes, what happens?
Eventually, armed men from the state will show up, evict you, and seize the property.
Therefore, you don't really own it. You are, in reality, just a permanent tenant renting the land from the sovereign state.
Allodial title is the exact opposite of that paradigm. It is a very old foundational legal concept, meaning absolute, supreme ownership of land, free and clear of any superior landlord, sovereign, or state entity.
It is land that cannot be taxed by a municipality, it cannot be regulated by a zoning board, it cannot be seized by eminent domain.
Because under allodial title, you are the ultimate sovereign of that territory. The land becomes an extension of your biological I.
You aren't renting your existence from the government. You are the absolute king or queen of that specific space.
And this is exactly how the survival protocol concludes. The author argues that if you execute the legal severance in 2026, if you preserve your biological energy in gold, and if you acquire allodial space at the very bottom of the cycle in 2032, you will have successfully built what the text calls a parallel polis.
A private sovereign community operating entirely outside the jurisdiction of the dying system.
So by the time the Benner cycle hits its final terminal point in 2035 and the monster initiates the Great Panic, liquidating the remaining 98% of the artificial person and consuming all the digital humans trapped within the biometric cage.
You are completely insulated. You are watching the ultimate storm from inside an impenetrable, mathematically sound fortress.
It is a breathtakingly comprehensive blueprint. It attempts to provide a step-by-step mechanism for stepping entirely outside of the modern financial, legal, and administrative paradigm.
Okay, let's take a breath and bring this all together. We have covered a massive amount of incredibly dense, esoteric, and challenging material today.
We really have.
We started with the concept of a mathematically scheduled economic collapse based on 150-year-old agricultural data. We moved through the terrifying mechanics of biometric money traps, digital twins, and sociopathic corporate states.
We ended with alchemical legal defenses, certified mail estoppels, and the ancient concept of allodial title.
It is an overwhelming amount of information to process. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to connect all this dense theory back to you, the listener, and your daily life.
It is essential to look past the dense terminology, the aggressive timelines, and the sci-fi elements to examine the core resonance of the author's underlying message.
Exactly. You might not believe in pig iron cycles predicting the exact month of a global financial crash. You might be highly skeptical of the logistics required to roll out a biometric $10 bill that steals your pulse to feed a blockchain. But strip all that specific esoteric machinery away for a second. Ask yourself this. Does the core diagnosis of the text resonate with your reality?
Does the fundamental concept of the rent generation feel accurate to your lived daily experience?
When you look at your bank account, do you feel like you are working harder, producing more physical value, but are mathematically prohibited from actually owning a piece of the world you are helping to build?
Are you trapped in an economic system that massively rewards holding assets you can't afford to buy, far more than it rewards the actual hard work of your labor?
Is the feeling of being a permanent tenant in your own life palpable?
If we synthesize what this text actually achieves beyond the specific dates and UCC forms, it functions as a potent modern mythology of financial sovereignty.
A mythology. Expand on how you mean that in this context.
A mythology is not necessarily a falsehood. It is a narrative structure we use to make sense of forces that feel too massive, chaotic, and terrifying to control.
And the global economic system today is overwhelmingly massive.
It is opaque, algorithmically driven, and seemingly entirely indifferent to the suffering of the individual. It feels uncontrollable.
Right.
The Dr. O text takes that chaotic dread and uses the rigid language of commercial law, the evocative imagery of alchemy, and the precision of cyclical mathematics to construct a narrative where the individual can actually regain agency.
It offers a profound psychological promise. If you study the secret rules of the machine, if you perform the exact right sequence of actions, you can defeat the monster.
It is a deeply empowering narrative engineered for a generation that feels profoundly, structurally disempowered.
It gives you a roadmap, a sense of direction, when you feel like you're wandering lost in a maze that was explicitly designed to bankrupt you. It serves as a powerful psychological tool, regardless of whether you ever actually march into a post office to file UCC-1 forms.
It wakes you up to the architecture of the system you are living inside. It forces you to look at the matrix.
It forces the reader to aggressively question their foundational assumptions about ownership, about the nature of value, and about the true underlying dynamic of their relationship with the state.
Yes, it certainly does.
And that leads me directly to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with today. Thought to mull over the next time you look at a massive deduction on your paycheck, or write a check for your rent, or read the next headline celebrating a booming stock market while the cost of your groceries doubles.
The entire goal of the Dr. O survival protocol, the apex of the mountain, is to reach 2032 and secure an allodial title.
The goal is to truly, absolutely own your land, your wealth, and your physical life, entirely free from any higher authority or state interference.
Complete, unadulterated sovereignty.
But true ownership, true sovereignty, means total, unmitigated responsibility. If you actually possess an allodial title, you have severed all your safety nets.
There is no state protection.
There is no FDIC insurance to make you whole if someone physically steals your gold. There is no FEMA to rebuild your house if a storm destroys it. There is no one to blame and no one to sue if the crops fail on your sovereign corner lot.
You are entirely alone in your freedom.
It is pure, terrifying liberty. So here's the question you must ask yourself. If you were handed the keys to absolute sovereignty tomorrow, the total crushing responsibility of being the I, would you truly have the courage and the strength to hold them?
Or is there, deep down in the psychology of our modern era, a strange, dark comfort in remaining a renter?
Where, despite the cost, someone else is always ultimately responsible for maintaining the roof over your head.
That is the ultimate, inescapable question of sovereignty that the text forces us to confront.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly dense, challenging deep dive into the architecture of the rent generation and the complex survival protocols of Dr. O. We aren't here to tell you what to believe or whether the Benner cycle will truly snap in 2026.
But we are always here to encourage you to keep looking closer.
To keep digging deeper and to never stop questioning the reality of the economic world built around you. See you next time.